Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Blackhawks, in which the Sharks have lost 6-2. So the Blackhawks get revenge for those first couple of wins that the Sharks had this season, and the season series finishes off 2-1 in favor of the Sharks. And this game started off pretty well for the Sharks. The first period as a whole was not really all that bad of a period for the Sharks. You could certainly say that the play was more so towards themselves than the Blackhawks. They had the only goal of the period, although that did come on a 5-on-3. That was Evander Kane to make it 1-0. Come second period, the Blackhawks just began to take over and basically never really relinquished that advantage until the end of the game. The Blackhawks would get 3 goals from Keith, Kane, and Brandon Saad, 2 of those coming on the power play, and that would be the score at the end of the second period. We would then get an early goal from Alex Nylander to make it 4-1 Blackhawks before Timo Meier, also on the power play, would be able to make it 4-2 to at least bring it to within a reasonable amount of goals to try and come back in this game, but eventually goals would be added by Kane and by Kubalik to make it 6-2 Blackhawks, and that would be the final score of the game. So just an all-around pretty bad performance from the Sharks. The first period was the only one that had any sort of redeeming qualities in it, but realistically just decent offensive chances that were thwarted pretty heavily by a good performance from Corey Crawford, but some really bad defensive coverage. First thing to talk about would be Dell, as he ended up with the start here tonight. So I guess Booner appreciated more the performance of Dell versus the Senators than he did Jones versus the Avalanche. Dell, unfortunately, did struggle a bit tonight. Now, as I said, there were a lot of good chances for the Blackhawks, and Dell did make a few solid saves, but a couple of these, like the Keith one, was one that Dell could have had. The second Kane goal that made it 5-2 was one Dell definitely could have had. The Kubalik one was a very good shot. That's a tough save. The Brandon Saad one, also a pretty tough save, certainly. So these weren't all very stoppable shots, but when a goalie lets in 6, it's very unlikely that they still played well, and so not a great game for Dell, and Jones would likely get the start in the next game, if of course there is a next game, as I'll get to that more near the end. Next, I'll talk about Kevin Labanc, as he's been a pretty controversial player here for the Sharks recently. He hasn't been doing much offensively, but when you do watch him play, he does seem to be involved in the play enough that you would expect the offense to follow, but it just really hasn't been the case. Labanc has also been struggling at times defensively this season, which has found him at times demoted to the 4th line. Now, of course, with the extra injury to Logan Couture, as the injury woes for the Sharks continue, Labanc was basically forced to be here in the top 6, and he looked pretty decent in this game on the line with Kane and Gregor, which was maybe the Sharks' best line, it could definitely be said. But Labanc does need to find some more consistency. Of course, this past offseason, he took a 1-year deal for $1 million, hoping to be able to prove himself after a pretty solid offensive year in the previous season. But with the Sharks as a whole, as a team, really taking a downturn for the worse here, and the offense really struggling from the Sharks side, Labanc has suffered from that and has suffered from also struggling himself. And so the contract that he probably could have negotiated for last offseason is going to look a lot worse than what he's going to get this season. Next, I'll talk about the Sharks' penalty kill, which, at least coming into tonight, had remained at the top of the league. But I don't know if this is just me who has had this feeling that the Sharks' penalty kill has actually been struggling as of late. Again, as I said, it's remained near the top, but it feels like every power play is not only getting great chances for the other team, but a lot of the times the other team is scoring, and the Blackhawks managed to convert a couple here tonight. And the Sharks' penalty kill, obviously, it's not really a huge surprise that it's been struggling with Hurdle out for a while, Goodrow having been traded at the deadline, now Couture is out. So the Sharks are sort of trying to plug holes here and there. Their only real consistent penalty killer, I guess, would be Melker Karlsson, and like Sorensen would get a few seconds here or there on the penalty kill on a fully healthy Sharks team with Goodrow still on the team. But hopefully this is something that can remain consistent. As we've seen, especially here tonight, the power play has begun to take an upturn. The only 2 Sharks goals tonight were on the power play, so if the penalty kill can remain consistent, the Sharks should be good for the rest of the season. Again, as I say, if there is a rest of the season. And finally, I'll talk about Evander Kane, a player who has been also sort of like Labanc, where he has been struggling defensively as well, but unlike Labanc, he has been contributing offensively pretty significantly, now up at 26 goals, looking to hit the 30-goal mark. Kane has sort of just been a decently consistent force for the San Jose Sharks. I don't really commit fully to that consistent, because Kane is always a player who has been a streaky type of player in his career, but it has been nice to see him be able to contribute time and time again. He's been very good on the power play with the Sharks, basically their only consistent power play scorer, and so a lot has been going well for Evander Kane. Of course, Kane now on a 7-year deal for $7 million. I think he's on the second year of that. It was a deal that when it was signed, many people did question it, because Evander Kane has never really shown an ability to remain fully healthy for a full season, and maybe some people didn't believe he was worth that $7 million, but he has been proving his worth as of late. A consistent 30-goal scorer who plays with an edge like Evander Kane, as long as he's not crossing that line and getting suspended, is pretty valuable for $7 million. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action, supposedly, come this Friday. They would face off against the St. Louis Blues. However, of course, the big news of the night is that the NBA has actually canceled the rest of the season due to the coronavirus. And while the NHL hasn't made the announcement yet that they're going to follow the same way, it is somewhat expected that by tomorrow there could be news that that is exactly going to happen. So who knows what the fallout of that is going to be. I assume that would come with the announcement, or at least soon after the announcement, and when that does occur, I'll likely have a video about that. But right now, the future of the NHL this season is up in the air. Hopefully they decide to maybe cancel this year's draft and sort of just let that one go to the next season and just go to 2021, where the Sharks actually have their first round pick. But more seriously, obviously a pretty big deal if the season does get canceled. The Stanley Cup playoffs could potentially either get postponed or also just canceled in general, and that would be a big deal for the sport. Class dismissed.